Okay, so for this next video, this one I'm just kind of giving you guys like an idea of what you guys can do for this changing mandala. So let's look at like mandalas because they're pretty cool. Okay, mandalas can have many different shapes, and usually they are very symmetrical. They have like radial symmetry, so I can kind of cut in almost any way, and it's still going to be like perfect halves. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We have a bunch of different shapes. Now, how could we kind of do this in code? There's a number of ways. Um, we do know how to create complex shapes. We can create these type of shapes. Okay, and I see like looking here, like those just look like squares. So what we need to do is we need to be able to kind of organize our pieces. Like maybe I want to design this shape, but I'm going to want to have more of them. So I really need to be able to design this with loops, which we haven't really got into, and using arrays, which we have had a little bit of a primer on that. Okay, so knowing what we know with objects, let's start kind of building them. All right, so the major difference, and I'm going to kind of walk through different pieces of this, is that our mandalas will be able to change. We want to be able to change when we're moving our mouse around, that the colors will be dynamic. We also want to make it so that our mandalas will actually be able to spin and do different things. So maybe we want it to have it where it's rotating based off of certain values that are increasing or decreasing. So we can do that for angles, like what we've done with rotate. We can also have it where we are custom creating these shapes and we're having those move and be dynamic too. So let's start playing around with that, okay? So to start off with, we haven't really talked about transparency, so I want to kind of go into that real quick. Let's look at color so we can see it. Okay, now when we're using color, it's going by default, we're doing RGB. Okay, now color actually has 4 parameters for every color we do. We have each channel, which is red, green, blue, and then we actually have an alpha channel. The alpha channel stands for how clear or transparent something is. Okay, and the value for it is actually in this is 0 to 255. Now there's a couple other ways that we can do colors other than just actually doing it this way. We could do RGB or RGBA values. This, I would say, is the absolute easiest way to do it because I don't have to deal with a lot of quotation marks and stuff. Okay, so as long as we have 3 color channels, the 4th will be a transparency channel. If we have only 1 color channel, if we add a second one, then we have a transparency but on our gray values. Okay, so we want to build that out. Okay, so that being said, just to show you what that looks like, let's go into the draw, and I'm going to draw a rectangle at width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and let's give it a size of 100. It's going to have a fill color. Let's just use push and pop. We'll get used to this. Push and pop, and we want it to have a fill color of, I don't know, let's say like some shade of red. So we'll do fill color 255, 0, 0. All right. That is now our red. Okay, now let's put a circle. So I'm going to also do push and pop. Push, pop, and I want to do a circle. And this is going to be, let's say it's going to be green. Okay. So color 0, 255, 0. and we'll do a circle. Width divided by 2, height divided by 2. I want them to overlap, and let's do 150. There we go. It's overlapping. Now with this color, neither of these have any transparency. So if I want this color to actually show up, I got to go to the one that's on the top, and I can add some transparency to it. So if I add a fourth parameter, and let's say I want it to be halfway see-through, I can add a value. Now I'm seeing some color shine through. So what we're seeing here, this looks a little bit more yellow because I'm blending the green with the red. Okay, that's what this transparency is it gets larger and smaller. So let's do mouse X so we can see it. Fully transparent. I'm seeing that red. As I'm bringing it out, I'm seeing less and less of the red until it is completely opaque. Okay, so having even the transparency moving around and changing color gives it a cool effect. Okay, so that kind of brings us to where we need to be to design. So I am going to actually create a couple functions just to kind of walk through this. Create, let's call it inner shape, and I'm just going to do this for organization. In here, let's say I'm just going to build it off of simple shapes. I still want to use push and pop. I'm just going to start with push and pop. I know that I might put more push and pop in there, but I want to get in here and I want to start drawing some shapes. Okay, now for this, let's use translate, and actually we could use translate to center it all at the very start, which might not be a bad idea. So let's maybe do that. We're going to translate at the very start. That way, if I want to move this later, which I am, I can do this easy enough. Height divided by 2, width divided by 2. That means everything is going to be drawn in terms of that point, so my x's and y's are going to be plus or minus that to draw them to the right or the left. So if I draw a rectangle, so let's put rect mode, and we'll do center because I want stuff to spin and move around. Now I can start drawing a rectangle. So I want to draw actually multiple rectangles, but if I go rect and then do say 0, 0, and say 20. We need to call it, so we're going to call create inner shape. Now, if I wanted to rotate, so I'm going to draw, say, multiple of them and kind of have them stack on top of each other, I'm going to go to rotate. After each one, I could rotate, let's say, 45 degrees. And then I'm drawing the same thing again. 0, 0, at 20, the exact same shape. I just rotate it. Okay, I could do this, and if I notice that I'm doing anything that's a little bit repetitive, that's where I'm wanting to look at doing a loop. Okay, now I am drawing this, let's say, instead of doing 45, I want to do something that is divisible by 360, since I have 360 degrees. So anything that is divisible, so if I do, say, 360, I know that if I divide by, let's say, 36, that's going to give me an even whole number. Well, a whole number is what I'm looking for. Then I know that it is actually divisible. Okay, so if I did, say, 12, that's going to give me 30. If I do 10, that's going to give me 36. So that I can play around with these values, and as long as I have something that's divisible, that could be the number of shapes that I'm going to have in that ring or that set. And that's where I could draw some stuff. So in here, I might only need a couple because I wanted it to rotate 45. And if we look here, it doesn't really look very good. Like it's not rotating right. And I'll show you why. It's not rotating. At 45, they should line up pretty good. The reason is because we have not changed the angle mode. And since I know that I'm going to do the angle mode all the time, in here I'm just going to put the angle mode to degrees because I prefer that over radians any day of the week. That looks better. All right, now I could do this, have much smaller ones. I'm going to just kind of play around with this. Keep in mind we're drawing from back to front, so maybe I'm going to have a couple rectangles, and then maybe I'm going to have some circles in there. We're already centered. Doesn't matter if I'm rotating a circle, it's going to look the same. I'm drawing at 0, 0, and let's do maybe 100, see what that looks like. Okay, I'm now going to take this, copy it, and make some smaller shapes on there. So I want concentric rings. So I'm going to do like 80, 60, 40. There we go. We got some cool designs on there. All right. Now, as I'm drawing, I could be like, I wanted to move this over. So because I have this push pop, I can actually move these over. Since everything is already drawn here, I could say that, you know what, I want to draw this over to the side, and then I basically want to draw one there and there and there. Okay, so that might be part of my inner shape. So let's just kind of play around with this. I'm going to translate, and so let's say I'm going to translate 100 over from the center. So there, it moved that. Now, if I just copy this whole thing, so let's kind of clean this up a little bit. Doing this project, you're going to end up looking at your patterns and then copying over a bunch. Okay, so I translated over. I did push and pop. Now, after I draw one, I'm going back to my original translation point, which was the center of the screen. I'm going to rotate, let's say 90 degrees. And then I'm going to redraw the exact same thing. So now if we see that, now we got two. Okay, I could do that again, which means I'm going to rotate another 90 and draw this whole thing. So if we're doing this, we're basically doing this 4 times because 90 goes into 360 evenly 4 times. So this would be where I'm doing the same thing over and over and over. It's creating extra work for me. So this is where a loop would come in, because if I was writing this whole thing, I would have to basically write this, rotate, write it, rotate, write it, rotate, write it, rotate 4 times. Because that's repetitive, I want to use a for loop. So for loops. For loops have 3 parts. Okay. They're written like this, for, and then we have a start value, we have an end value condition, and then we have our interval, or how much we're going to increase or decrease. So usually it's an incrementer or a decrementer, and this really depends on if you're going to have your loop increase or decrease in value until you get to this end value condition. Okay, so this is the format. So let's build it. I'm going to say for. Now our start value always is going to be some variable because it's going to be changing, but because we're building this inside this code block, it's only going to exist inside of here, but we could use it as a value to calculate other things. So I'm going to just call it index. You could, traditionally, you would normally see this as I. I'm going to start it at 0. Normally when we count in computer code, we start at 0, so it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, since we're going to be doing this 4 times, each element has a position. So each item inside of a list is called an element, and it has a position. So the first one that we create is going to be at position 0, second one is going to be at position 1, third one is going to be at position 2, so on and so forth. Okay, we have a couple built-in variables. The total number of elements in an array is called the dot length. Okay, so if I have 5 elements in an array, these are the positions 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 of where those elements are. But if I count them up, I have a total length in that array of 5. Okay, so this is kind of what we're going to be using to build. So my index is going to start at 0. I'm going to separate this with semicolons. I want to run this exactly 4 times. So I'm going to start at 0, and I want to go until index is no longer less than 4. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3. That is 4 times. When this increases up one more time, it is no longer, it would be actually equal to 4. So 4 is not less than 4, which means it would kick me out of the loop. Now, I could write this, well, the last piece, let's fill out the last piece. The last piece is going to be how we're going to increment up. So usually we have it increasing up by 1 or decreasing by 1. You could do it by even numbers depending on what you want, or odd numbers. That's like a whole nother subject. All right, so we could write this. This would start at 0, so we'd go 0, run through the entire loop. Then this would go based off of this, would increase by 1, become 1, run through the entire loop, check, is this condition true or false? If it continues to be true, we would continue to run through the loop. Okay, that's how a loop works. So eventually we would get to the case where index has increased enough to be 4. 4 is not less than 4, it'd kick us out. Okay, so we could also write this, though, starting at any value. We could do less than or equal to 4. This, in this case, would also do it 1, 2, 3, and 4 would still actually work. Or we could do, say, less than 5. That would still give us 4 elements. There's multiple ways that we can write this. I would suggest you guys get used to counting by zeros. It actually will play in a lot more later on. Okay, so inside of this loop, that's my code block. This will run. This is the mechanics to have this loop run exactly 4 times. Inside of here, if we put that code in there and we run it, I just created these 4 elements, and I only had to write this code 1 time because I put it in the loop. So we've seen that I already saved work because I had that copied and pasted twice just to get it twice using a loop, which really only added 1 line of code. I was able to do this 4 times. Okay, now we could do this instead of rotating 90. So that is my inner shape. And that's what's being drawn. Now let's say I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to use another loop to do this. But let's say that I'm going to call it my create inner center, and I'm going to do a little bit more on this one. So this one, I actually want maybe a row of rectangles going around in a circle. I want a lot of them. Okay, so knowing that, I'm already going to be doing a loop. I just need to position the first one, find out exactly how I want to have it positioned. So I'm going to do create inner center. And then inside of here, as long as I'm doing stuff with push and pop, everything is good. So in my loop, I pushed, I translated, I popped. Now right here, this rotate, this is coming back to my original translate here. So if I'm going to draw something here, I'm keeping that rotate value. That would be problematic. So what I can do is I can put a push and a pop around this entire for loop. So let's just do that so we can see that it shouldn't change anything. Push, pop. And the reason why we're doing this is because I don't want any rotation when I'm doing like another like layer. So there it is. Okay. So now I'm not rotated at all when I go to do the create inner circle. So I'm going to draw one shape. I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I want it to be, not exactly in the center. But maybe I might want to have it rotate a little bit as we're going around. So again, I'm going to use push, and I'm going to use pop. And inside of here, I'm going to draw that rectangle, which means if I wanted to rotate it, I'm going to have to translate over, and then I can rotate on the center of the shape. So I will translate, and let's say I just translate like 50 over, none over on the Y, because I'm just going to, since I'm rotating around, I really only need to just use one value, since I know that I'm ultimately going to be doing a loop to do this. Okay, so let's rotate, and I'm just going to rotate like 15 degrees and then draw a rectangle at the zeros, and I'll have it as, like, let's say a size of 50. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, now this is on top because I'm drawing it after I'm drawing this inner shape. I'm doing that inner center. Okay, so basically I want this, I want to, after I translate, I'm going to rotate and do this rectangle every single time. So let's see what would happen when I copy this and paste it. Rerun. So now we get another one. Okay. If I pasted this multiple times, what do we get? Okay. It's all going off of that certain spot right there. Now, if I don't have that, it's centered. Okay. So I can kind of play around with this. If I want this to be bigger, so now we're translated over at that 50. And I rotate. This is rotating the shape itself, but I could outside of here. So again, we can do. So let's take off some of this. We could have it where we're rotating the entire shape around and then have it rotated on itself, which is what we have here. So if I have a rotate here outside of this push, and let's say I'm doing 90, I see that it's moving around, okay? So I could do now, in terms of this, let's say I wanted to have 12 of those, so I could do 360 divided by 12, which means I would have to rotate by 30 degrees to have 12 objects, or I'm going to have to rotate by 12 degrees to have 30 objects. So that's telling me how big I need to do my loop. Okay, so in here, I'm going to need to do that piece. So I want to basically repeat this a whole bunch of times. So again, I'm going to do a for loop to repeat this. And before each time, I'm going to need to rotate. So I'm going to put a push and a pop before I write this. So there's going to be a push, and then I'm closing my for loop, which is going to be here. And then I'm going to put a pop. All right, so inside of here, we're going to do that lit index again because that made it easy. We're going to start at 0, and we want to rotate. We just said if we wanted we wanted 12 shapes, so we're going to rotate that 30 times. So I am doing this 12 times. Okay, so I'm going from 0 to index is less than 12, okay, because we're starting at 0. And then we want index to increase by 1. So this now is going to do this 12 times, okay? But I have not moved out of that spot each time I do it. So we're pushing and popping on this. After we do each one, we want to rotate like that 30 degrees. Now let's see where we're at. There we go. We have this, it's rotating 15 degrees. Now if I took off that 15 degrees, let's see what that looks like. It's drawing it more straight, and then we're rotating. I was rotating on itself when we were doing this. So it kind of gives us a different look. Okay. I could have this where maybe I was rotated like 45. It gives us a different look. Okay. So you can play around with this to get different stuff, but that's how we would figure if we wanted to have it where it goes equally around. We could do, we just need to find something that's divisible by 360 is divisible by it, and that gives us a number, and then we know what we have to. So these pairs right here would tell us what we'd have to rotate by, and then how many of those elements we have to have. Now that is all inside of here. I am drawing the shape and then rotating to get around inside of that loop, and then that whole thing is surrounded by a push and pop. So inside of this push pop right here, I could, you know, have that rectangle. I could have maybe so this rectangle, I could have a circle drawn right on top of that. So 0, 0, 50, and we get all of those that we can play around with. Okay. Now you could do push and pop to surround just for the rotation of each individual thing if you wanted to do that. We could play around with this in a lot of different ways. Okay, so that's basically it on how we would be able to build all of this changing mandala. So your guys is going to be completely different. You're going to use functions to be able to do this. Loops will make it so you don't have to write the thing over and over and over. However, in this case, if you guys don't want to use loops, that's all right. You're going to use loops a lot. You can copy and paste it to get your look that you have. Now, once you have everything, though, you are going to want to start creating some variables for colors. And we're going to want to map those to mouse X and mouse Y so that we can save this out. So challenges that we would have is that you're going to need to have composite shapes. Now I want to see these composite shapes built using simple shapes, their own composite shapes where you're taking the fill away without fill, and using curves. So it doesn't need to be every shape, but some of them could have curves, so you have like those leaf type designs that we see. We could build those out, and again we can just go around the loop on there. The only time that doing the loops, if it's too small and they're touching too much, then you have you can see where one's sticking on top of the other. You just have to be mindful of that, and we can play around with that however we want. Okay, so we want to make composite shapes built using simple shapes, composite shapes without fill, or complex curved shapes. Okay, we're going to want to use multiple of them to build the various rings. You guys should actually have 4 sets of rings. Okay, now every one of these is going to end up having colors. Okay, I should not, this should be very bright and vibrant. You guys are going to use colors. Use colors with the map function. Map, color picker, and random to color the fill and the stroke. Okay. And then you're going to also build in for the alpha is also going to be off of the map. Use map function for alpha on almost all of the shapes. For alpha transparency on almost all of the shapes. Okay. Now, if you give enough variation when I'm moving across the screen, we're going to get some really cool colors. Now, what I would do, because we're doing a changing mandala, is that you should still have radial symmetry as much as possible. Okay? So even the colors should be in sequence. So if I was doing like a green, teal, blue as like my default colors for these rings, it should be green, teal, blue, green, teal, blue, green, teal, blue for every single grouping or every single individual shape, so that we have that radial symmetry when we're looking at it. I can basically kind of cut it almost any way and I still have those designs. Okay. This is easiest by trying to organize into different functions and building those out. As you get a shape or a set group that you want, then you look at doing loops to make more of them so you don't have to keep manually creating each one. That makes things 1,000 times easier. And then you guys can just turn on and off each layer as you're building it so that you can look at what pieces need to be fixed, what needs to be changed. I would suggest that you use angle mode, as putting in degrees makes it 1,000 times easier. Translate, you can initially translate to the center so you don't have to worry about it being drawn from the top left. This will ultimately make it easier so that we could change this to mouse X, mouse Y when we want to scale down, which is something that you guys are going to need to do in the future. So while we're drawing this, we'll have this centered at the very center. Anytime you want to do a grouping, you're going to end up having to translate to that point. Anytime you want to rotate on yourself, you're going to have to translate and then draw at that new origin. Okay, so that is basically the changing mandala. Ultimately, this is going to become the background of one of our buttons. The final thing that we are going to do, though, is to add a save image function. So the ones that we did were save canvas or save. You guys are going to need to save that, and you're going to do that by key press. Okay, by the key press function. And this is just so that we can see a bunch of different options. What I want you guys to do is I want you guys to try to create the out of this your 3 best pictures, and you're going to also turn your 3 best pictures in to me with your actual code. Turn in your 3 best pictures with the code itself. Okay, so there's multiple ways that you can change the colors. This is going to be an awesome project. You guys are going to really like this. All right, good luck. Have fun.